If you bite that tree one more time, Oakley, I swear I'm going to climb it myself and ask it what it did to you." I said it half jokingly, half exasperated, standing in the middle of our sunlit backyard in a sleepy corner of Ohio, hands on my hips, watching my golden retriever puppy sink his tiny teeth into the same rough bark he'd been obsessed with since we brought him home. Oakley was only 4 months old and already had a quirky streak longer than his leash. He had a yard full of sticks, toys, and even an old tire he loved to drag around. But every single day, sometimes 5, 6 times a day, he made a beeline for the same old oak tree near the fence. And every single time, he gnawed at its base like it owed him money. "My name's Todd, and I'm just a regular guy who works from home, fixing up old furniture and selling it online. My wife, Jamie, teaches art at the local elementary school. And Oakley? Well, he's the star of our little family. We adopted him from a rescue just after New Year's. He was this fluff ball with paws too big for his body and a tail that wagged so hard it smacked walls like a drumstick. Jamie fell in love the moment she saw him. I took a few minutes more, but the way he looked at me, like he already knew me, sealed the deal. From day one, he was curious. Always sniffing corners, chasing shadows, rolling around in piles of leaves. But nothing got his attention like that tree. I tried spraying the bark with bitter apple, wrapping it with foil, even putting a puppy-safe fence around it. Didn't matter. Oakley would find a way in, and it wasn't just casual biting. He'd stand there, ears up, tail wagging gently, and chomp. Not in anger. Not like he was teething either. It looked intentional. By the second week, it became routine. I'd open the back door in the morning, and before I could say anything, he'd dash for the tree. One time I tried calling him back with a piece of turkey, his favorite, but nope. He gave me a quick glance, then kept biting. Jamie thought it was funny at first. "Maybe he's part beaver," she joked, pouring her morning coffee. But as the days rolled on, and Oakley kept going back to that same spot with that same focus, I started to wonder if it wasn't a little odd. We took him to the vet. Clean bill of health. No issues with his teeth. No signs of anxiety or stress. "Some dogs just get fixated," the vet said, patting Oakley's head. "As long as he's not hurting himself, it's probably just a phase." Still, it bugged me. Not just the behavior, but the consistency of it. Oakley never acted like that with any other tree. And we had 5 in our yard. He sniffed them all, peed on a couple, but only that one near the fence. An old, broad oak with thick bark and a deep groove near its base got this kind of attention. I started paying closer attention. Taking notes even. What time of day he went over, how long he stayed, whether the weather affected it. Rain or shine, hot or cold, Oakley was loyal to that bark. One night, just before bed, I watched him through the glass door. He stood there in the moonlight, not biting this time, just staring at the tree. Still, silent, tail low but not tucked. I opened the door to call him in, and he turned, looked right at me, then back at the tree, like he was trying to tell me something. Jamie thought I was overthinking. Maybe he smells something, a squirrel or an old nest. She was probably right. But still, why that tree? Why every day? By the 4th week, I started having dreams about that tree. Silly, I know. But in my dreams, Oakley would be barking at it, and I'd walk over and see something glowing in the bark, like a heartbeat. Sometimes there were voices, muffled, like underwater. I'd wake up sweating, Oakley curled up at the foot of the bed, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. Then came the scratching. It was subtle at first. A few grooves in the bark, deeper than Oakley could manage. I figured maybe a raccoon or possum had been digging at it at night. But then I noticed the ground, There was a patch of soil at the base that always seemed loose, like it had been freshly turned. I hadn't done any planting there. Jamie hadn't either. It was almost like something underneath was shifting. One morning I watched Oakley go to the tree, and instead of biting it right away, he started digging. Not fast or frantic like when he buried bones. Slow, careful, like he was uncovering something. Jamie came out with her coffee. "He's doing it again?" "Yeah, but look at how he's digging. It's not random." We stood there, watching our little pup scrape away the dirt. His tail wagged lightly. Every few seconds he'd pause, look at me, then keep going. After about 10 minutes, he stepped back and let out a tiny bark. Not loud, almost like a whisper. Then he sat. I walked over and crouched down. The hole was maybe a foot deep. At first I didn't see anything, just roots and dirt, but then a flash of something. Metal. I reached in and pulled out what looked like the corner of an old tin box, rusted and bent. Oakley wagged harder now, circling me. Jamie knelt beside me, eyes wide. "What the?" It took a few minutes of careful digging, but we finally got the box free. It was heavier than it looked. The latch was rusted shut, so I grabbed a flathead from the garage and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were a few yellowed papers, some kind of medallion, and a photograph. The photo was black and white. A man in uniform standing beside the very same tree. He looked young, maybe early 20s. There was a date scrawled on the back in looping cursive. August 12th, 1943. Beneath it, "For Mary, in case I don't come back." Jamie gasped. "Oh my gosh, this must have been buried during the war." I turned over the medallion. It was a bronze star. We looked at each other, stunned. Oakley sat between us, tongue out, happy as could be. That afternoon, I called the local historical society. They were as floored as we were. A few days later, they helped us track down the man in the photo. Turns out he was a local boy named Oakley Ellison. He'd gone off to Europe and never made it home. No next of kin still in the area. The tree must have been on his family's property back then, and somehow, all these years later, our backyard held a piece of his story. But even after the discovery, Oakley didn't stop. He still went to the tree, still bit it, still circled it like it was alive. So one sunny morning, I made a decision. If my dog thought that tree needed more attention, I'd give it. I grabbed my chainsaw and stepped out onto the grass. Jamie followed, quiet. Oakley sat nearby, watching. "I'm not doing this lightly," I told them. "But if something else is in there, he's been trying to tell us." As the blade roared to life and I approached the bark, Oakley stood up and walked toward the tree, just a few feet away. He didn't bite it this time. He just waited. The sound of the chainsaw filled the quiet morning air, slicing through the stillness like a warning. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I kept going, cutting a wide wedge into the base of the tree. I didn't know exactly what I was expecting to find. More old war relics, maybe some family keepsake, or nothing at all. But the way Oakley stood there, unblinking, still as a statue, made me believe this wasn't just another stubborn dog quirk. Jamie stayed back by the porch steps, holding her coffee, eyes locked on us. Oakley didn't flinch when bark sprayed his way. He didn't whimper, didn't growl. He just sat, watching. It took close to 20 minutes to get the tree to the point where it groaned and swayed. The oak was older than our house, maybe even older than the neighborhood, with deep grooves and a twisted trunk that bore years of seasons and storms. Finally, with one last pull of the saw, it cracked. A sharp, echoing snap, and tipped backward, falling slowly onto the grass with a soft thud that seemed much too gentle for the moment. I turned off the saw and exhaled, wiping sweat from my forehead. Oakley stood and trotted over, sniffing the fallen trunk, tail wagging just once. Jamie joined me, squinting at the jagged stump. Well? I walked around the remains of the tree, brushing away debris, checking for anything unusual. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Just solid wood, rings of age, and some ants scattering from the disturbance. But then I noticed something strange near the base, right where Oakley had always bitten. A kind of indentation. Not natural, not from insects or rot. A shape, almost rectangular, about 6 inches across. Jamie knelt beside me, touching the groove. That looks carved. It does. Oakley sniffed again and gave a small bark. It startled me, not because it was loud, but because it felt timed. I grabbed a chisel and hammer from the garage and started to gently chip away at the wood. It wasn't easy. The tree was still dense with moisture, but after a few careful minutes, something gave. A piece splintered and fell away, revealing a hollow pocket within the trunk. Inside was something wrapped in thick cloth. I reached in, heart pounding, and pulled it free. The cloth was brittle and damp, but it held together enough to protect what was inside, a small wooden box. Unlike the rusted tin we'd found before, this one was polished, smooth, still sealed tight. Jamie and I looked at each other. I could see the same mix of wonder and disbelief on her face that I felt in my gut. We opened it together. Inside it were several old letters, carefully tied with twine, a faded locket, and a folded American flag. The letters were addressed to someone named Mary, the same name from the photo. The ink was faint but readable. I think these were written after he left, Jamie said quietly, scanning the top page. My throat tightened. She never got them. Oakley lay down beside the box and rested his head on his paws. We spent hours reading through the letters, sitting in the grass, occasionally pausing to take it all in. Frank had written about the war, but also about missing home, about the tree, about how, when he was a kid, he'd carved a little box into it with his father to hide treasures. He wrote that if anything happened to him, he hoped the tree would guard what mattered. He called it his silent friend. Jamie cried. I nearly did too. By the time the sun dipped low, the yard was quiet again, and Oakley had drifted off under the porch. I carried the box inside, washed my hands, and sat with Jamie at the kitchen table. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The next day, we contacted the Historical Society again. They sent over someone to document everything, and they were almost more excited than we were. They took photos, helped us safely store the items, and promised to honor the discovery properly. A week later, they confirmed something wild. Mary had been Frank's fiancée. After he was declared missing, she moved away. No one knew what had happened to her. She had no living family left. It was like the story had vanished into thin air, until Oakley brought it back. That night, as Jamie and I lay in bed, Oakley curled between us like he always did. I whispered, "How'd you know?" He didn't respond, of course, but I swear I saw his ears twitch. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on him. With the tree gone, I thought maybe he'd lose interest in that spot. But no, he still went to it, still sniffed around the stump, sat there sometimes like he was keeping watch. One morning I caught him pawing at the earth again, not aggressively, just a little scratch here and there. Curious, I walked over and noticed a few small stones buried just beneath the grass. I pulled them up and realized they weren't natural. They were arranged in a shape. A circle. Jamie helped me dig a bit more, and eventually we unearthed what looked like the edge of something man-made. Maybe stone, maybe metal. It was about 2 feet across, with a strange groove along one side. I'd never seen anything like it. Oakley barked once, then sat back down. "I think he's leading us again," I said, more to myself than anyone. Jamie nodded. "Maybe there's more." The next few days turned into an excavation. We kept digging, carefully, not wanting to disturb anything too suddenly. Eventually, we uncovered what looked like an old time capsule, built into the ground with stone sides and a rusted metal lid. It was heavy, too heavy to lift by hand. I called in a friend who worked construction. We got a small hoist and pulled the lid off. Inside was a small trove of items: childhood trinkets, a toy soldier, a few marbles, a leather-bound notebook. At the bottom was a small velvet pouch containing a silver ring. Inside the notebook was the same looping handwriting: "To be opened only when the world needs remembering." We sat there, under the midday sun, reading passages from a time before ours. Stories about a boy and his dreams, about summers spent chasing fireflies, and winters curled up by a fire with family. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. But it was beautiful. Pure. Oakley stayed nearby the whole time. Eventually, we reached the last page. It simply said, "Thank you, whoever you are. Keep this safe." We took a long breath and looked at each other. "Should we keep it?" Jamie asked softly. I shook my head. "I think it belongs to everyone." We donated the contents to the local museum. They were overjoyed, said they'd build a small exhibit, call it the tree that remembered. But Oakley, he still wasn't done. A few nights later, I woke to find him standing at the back door, staring out into the yard. I followed his gaze. Nothing out there but stars and the soft outline of the stump. I opened the door, and he trotted out. No hesitation. I followed, pulling on my boots. He walked right to the stump, sniffed once, then looked over his shoulder at me. "Okay," I said. "Show me." He began to dig again, but this time it was off to the side, about 6 feet away. I got down beside him and helped. The ground was soft from rain, and within minutes we hit something else. Another box. Smaller, wooden, this one newer, sealed with a padlock. Oakley pawed at it once, then sat. Jamie had joined us by then. She crouched next to me. "What now?" I didn't know, but I knew we had to open it. Back inside, I grabbed some tools and got the lock off without too much trouble. We opened the lid and found something none of us expected. A cassette tape, labeled in black marker, "Play Me," and beneath it, a single photograph. It was the same man, Frank, standing by the tree again. But this time, he was older. Beard, deeper eyes. The date on the back? 1963. "Wait," Jamie whispered. "They said he never came home." We looked at each other. Oakley sat at our feet, his eyes bright. Something about this was bigger than us, and somehow our little golden pup knew it all along. Jamie sat on the couch holding the photograph in both hands, her thumb brushing the edge like it might make more sense if she touched it long enough. I had the cassette in my hand, turning it over, reading the words again and again. "Play me." "You sure you want to do this now?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Whatever's on there. It's waited long enough." Oakley lay curled up by the front door, as if guarding us from something we couldn't see. The house was quiet except for the wind whispering through the trees outside, the ones that were still standing. We didn't have a cassette player. Hadn't for years. But Mrs. Greeley down the road had a basement full of old electronics. She was a retired music teacher and kept everything from her teaching days, just in case. I called her, explained what we'd found. She didn't hesitate. "Come on over. I've got something that'll work." So we packed the tape and the photo, bundled up, and Oakley jumped into the truck with us like he already knew this was part of the plan. The drive was short, and Mrs. Greeley was waiting with her porch light on, her white curls glowing under the soft yellow bulb. She waved us in like we were family. Her basement smelled like cedar and thyme. Shelves lined with sheet music, boxes labeled with years, and more instruments than I'd ever seen in one place outside a store. She led us to a corner where an old cassette deck sat on a rolling cart, already plugged in. Jamie handed her the tape, and she slid it in with the care of someone handling something sacred. Then she pressed play. At first, just static, then a click, and a voice. "Mary, if you're hearing this, then somehow you found it. Somehow, you're still out there." It was the same voice from decades ago, the one I imagined when reading the letters. Deep, slow, thoughtful, frank. Jamie grabbed my hand. "I'm not sure if this'll ever reach you or if anyone will understand what happened. But I had to leave this behind. Someone needs to know." There was a pause, the kind that stretched longer than it should have. "I came back in '46, not officially. Not legally. Something happened out there. Something I never reported. I was lost behind enemy lines for nearly 2 years. Then I wasn't. Not because I found my way out, but because someone, or something, led me. I never saw it, not really, just signs, a trail. Like something was guiding me home. I followed it, and when I got close, I buried what I couldn't carry anymore." Jamie's grip tightened. "I didn't come home right away. I watched from a distance, saw the house boarded up, learned you moved away. They said I was dead. Maybe I was for a while." Oakley whimpered from the corner. "I left everything in the tree, and later, in the ground. All my stories, my memories, pieces of who I was. If you're hearing this, maybe you found them. Maybe you're someone who needs to remember what we were before everything changed." The voice cracked. "I'm sorry I didn't come back. I didn't know how. But if someone's listening now, I hope it's not too late to make it matter." Then silence. A long, unbroken hum until the tape clicked and stopped. Mrs. Greeley wiped a tear from her cheek. "That man was hurting." Jamie nodded. "But he wanted someone to know, someone to hear it." We thanked her, promised to return the deck, and drove home in silence. The wind had picked up by the time we got back. Oakley stayed alert the whole ride, head out the window like he was taking in every scent. That night, we sat by the fireplace, Oakley between us, and spread out everything we had. The letters, the flag, the medallion, the notebook, the time capsule trinkets, the photo, and now, the tape. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. The next morning, something strange happened. Oakley didn't go to the stump. For the first time in weeks, he sniffed the air, stretched, then walked to the far end of the yard near the tool shed. He paused, looked back at me, then began digging again. I grabbed my coat and boots, heart pounding again. Jamie followed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What is it now?" she asked. "Let's find out." Oakley dug with more energy this time. No hesitation. Within minutes, we uncovered another patch of disturbed soil. I knelt down and helped, hands cold, breath rising in white clouds. Another box. Smaller. Wooden. Barely held together. I lifted it out slowly and opened it. Inside were just two things: a key and a folded piece of paper. Jamie opened the note. It was one sentence, handwritten in the same looping script. Home is still waiting. We stared at it, then at the key. It was old, brass, labeled with a small tag that read 82 Ash Lane. I knew the address. It was on the other side of town. A house that had sat abandoned for years, hidden behind overgrown shrubs and a weather-beaten fence. People said it was haunted, that strange lights flickered at night. Kids dared each other to run up and knock on the door. I looked at Jamie. You thinking what I'm thinking? She nodded. Let's go. We packed the box and the note, loaded Oakley into the truck again, and headed toward the edge of town. The house came into view like a forgotten memory. 2 stories, faded blue paint, porch sagging, windows fogged with time. I parked at the curb. Jamie stayed back while I walked up with the key. The front door looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The lock was rusted, but the key slid in and turned. The door creaked open. The air inside was thick with dust and silence, furniture covered with sheets, a grandfather clock frozen at some forgotten hour. Oakley stepped in behind me, nose twitching, tail low but steady. Jamie followed. Every step we took echoed like a heartbeat. We moved through the house, room by room, not sure what we were looking for. Then, in the back room, what must have been the study, we found it. A photo wall. Dozens of pictures. Frank and Mary. Picnics. A wedding photo, a baby, a birthday party. A life lived in secret. Jamie's breath caught. He didn't just hide. He started over. I nodded. But he never forgot. We spent the afternoon cataloging everything. Notes, journals, more letters. He'd written down everything. His journey, his memories, his regrets. There were mentions of a group he met in the woods. People who helped him, hid him, taught him. A community that didn't leave records. A quiet life lived between the lines. And in one envelope, addressed simply to the finder, a note. If you made it here, then Oakley did his job. He was always meant to find you, to guide you, just like I was guided home. Jamie put a hand to her mouth. How did he know his dog would find us? She whispered. I didn't have an answer, but I believed it. We decided to preserve the house. Clean it up. Document everything. Share it with the Historical Society. Let Frank's story be told the way it was meant to be. But more than that, we decided to let the house breathe again. Bring it back to life. Oakley seemed to agree. Every time we visited, he trotted through like he belonged there. Sat in the same spot by the fireplace. Slept under the same window every time. One afternoon, I was dusting off the mantel when I found a final note, wedged behind an old clock. Folded, aged, almost crumbling. It said simply, "For those who listen, when others forget." Oakley barked once, and I smiled. The following week was a whirlwind of discovery. Every corner of the old house at 82 Ash Lane seemed to whisper with a memory, and Oakley moved through it like he was tracing invisible footsteps. Jamie and I split our time between our home and Frank's, cleaning, organizing, and slowly breathing life back into rooms that hadn't seen it in decades. Word started to spread through town about the tree, the letters, the tape, and now the house. Neighbors who'd never stepped foot near Ash Lane were now stopping by, asking gentle questions, sharing stories passed down by parents and grandparents. Mrs. Greeley came one afternoon with a stack of newspaper clippings dating back to the 40s. She had a good memory, and more importantly, she had lived here her entire life. She remembered Mary vaguely. Quiet girl, sweet, always wore her hair in a braid. And Frank, she remembered only as the boy who used to walk her home from school when it rained. Most folks thought he died, she said, setting the papers down on the dining table. And then the war ended, and people moved on. But that house always felt like it was waiting. We read through everything she brought. Most articles were war reports, enlistment lists, community events from long ago. But one small piece caught my eye. A notice from 1964 about a John Franklin Ellison applying for a land permit outside city limits. The signature on the bottom matched the handwriting in the letters. "He changed his name," I whispered. Jamie looked up from the photo album we'd found in the upstairs bedroom. Probably so no one would come looking. Or maybe so he wouldn't be found. There was another address on the form, a rural parcel 10 miles outside town, deep in the wooded area beyond the reservoir. The property had no listed structures, no record of sale after the permit. It was like whoever lived there just stopped existing. That night, I sat on the porch of the Ash Lane house while Oakley curled up at my feet. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Frank had left one more piece of the puzzle out there, waiting to be found. And once again, it was Oakley who made the first move. The next morning, he sat by the front door, staring until I opened it. Then he took off, not running wildly, but walking steadily toward the truck. Tail low, ears perked, like he was ready for another chapter. Jamie met me in the kitchen. "Where's he going?" "He wants to drive. I think he knows where to go." She gave me a look, the kind that said this was crazy, but she believed it anyway. We grabbed our coats, packed some water, and followed our pup into the truck. Oakley led us down winding roads, past the edge of town, onto a dirt trail most folks didn't even know existed. We parked at a clearing and continued on foot, Oakley leading the way through the underbrush like he'd memorized the path. The air was colder here, quiet in a way that pressed on your ears. Even the birds seemed to be watching. About a mile in, we saw it. A small cabin, tucked beneath a grove of hickory trees, almost invisible from the trail. The wood was weathered, the roof half collapsed, but it stood. A real place. A secret place. Oakley stopped at the porch steps and sat. We approached slowly, hearts thudding. Jamie reached for my hand. Inside, dust blanketed every surface, but the air didn't feel empty. There was furniture, handmade, rough, functional, a table with 3 chairs, a bookshelf full of notebooks, and on the wall above the fireplace, a single photo in a cracked frame. Frank and Mary, older now, smiling beside a creek. "He brought her here," Jamie breathed. I moved to the bookshelf and picked up one of the notebooks. The front cover read, "The Years They Forgot." It wasn't just his story. It was hers, too. Pages and pages of memories, growing their own food, hosting travelers who'd lost their way, watching the seasons change from their porch. No mention of war, no talk of loss, just life. There was even a section titled Oakley. Jamie raised an eyebrow. "Wait, he had a dog named Oakley?" I flipped the page. No, it wasn't a dog. It was a name passed down, a marker. The Oakley they knew was a man, a friend who had helped Frank escape a German camp. According to the notes, Frank promised to name something important after him one day. We looked at Oakley, now curled at the hearth. "You think," Jamie started. "I think some names carry more than sound," I said. The sun began to set, casting golden light through the broken windows. We stayed until dark, reading, listening. And when we finally left, we locked the door behind us. But we didn't take anything. Not this time. Instead, we came back the next day, and the next, cleaning up, repairing, not to disturb the past, but to preserve it. Volunteers from the Historical Society came out with us. Even the mayor stopped by. The town was coming together, curious, excited, proud. A story once hidden was becoming a piece of their shared past. And through it all, Oakley kept leading. He showed us a spot behind the cabin where wildflowers bloomed even in the cold. Beneath them, we found a stone marker, barely visible, with the initials F.E. and M.W. and a date, 1981. "They passed here," Jamie said softly. "Together." We decided to build a small path leading from the road to the cabin. Nothing fancy, just stones and signage, enough for people to visit. Learn. Remember. Oakley oversaw every step. He'd sit beside the tools, bark when someone went off trail, nudge kids toward the flower beds like a furry tour guide. People fell in love with him. Children drew pictures of him. Someone made a little pin with his face on it that said, "Official Trail Guide." One afternoon, after clearing debris near the back fence, I heard Jamie call out. I ran over, expecting to find another artifact. Instead, I found her standing by a wooden post, staring at something carved into the bark of an old tree. It read, "For the ones who come next." And underneath, "Trust the dog." We looked at Oakley. He tilted his head like he was waiting for a thank you. I knelt beside him, scratched behind his ears. "You knew from the start, didn't you?" He licked my hand. We added the tree to the map of the property, marking it as a final stop on the trail. A place to pause, to remember the beginning of everything. Back home, things began to shift in subtle ways. Jamie started painting again. Big, sweeping pieces of forests and old houses, and a little golden dog always somewhere in the corner. I found myself writing, not just woodworking catalogs, but the story of all this. Of Frank and Mary. Of Oakley. Of how sometimes the world tries to forget, but memory has a way of finding a home. The Ash Lane house stayed open on weekends as a museum. People visited from neighboring towns. School groups came for field trips. A local journalist ran a piece called "The Dog That Remembered." And Oakley? He never seemed to tire. Every morning he'd trot to the truck, waiting. He never pushed. Never barked unless needed. But he watched. And somehow he always knew where we needed to go next. Then one morning he didn't wait by the truck. Instead, he sat by the fireplace, looking at the family photo wall we'd brought to our home. Jamie and I watched him for a moment before she said, "I think he's telling us something again." I knelt down. "What is it, buddy?" He stood up, walked over to the front door, and pawed at it once, so we followed. This time, he led us down a different road, one that ran past the old church, through the fields, and up a hill I hadn't climbed since I was a kid. At the top, he stopped, sat, looked out at the town below. Jamie stood beside me, breathing in the crisp air. "Why here?" I didn't have an answer. But Oakley just lay down, watching the sunrise. So we sat too, the three of us, in silence. And waited. The morning Oakley led us to the hill was colder than the others had been. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind that makes you feel like something's about to change. We sat up there for a long time, watching our town stretch below us, rooftops steaming, smoke curling from chimneys, school buses winding through the streets like veins carrying life. Oakley didn't move much, just stared. And after a while, we did too. When we finally came back down, Oakley didn't go back to the truck like usual. He led us around the base of the hill to a small thicket of trees I barely remembered from my childhood. It used to be part of someone's farmland, long since overgrown. The path was narrow, but Oakley pushed through it like he'd been there before. The trees gave way to a clearing, and in the middle of it stood a broken stone wall, maybe 4 feet high, covered in ivy and moss. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just another forgotten structure in a town full of them. But Oakley walked straight up to it and pawed at a spot on the north side. We brushed the leaves away and saw them. Initials, carved deep and worn with age. JL plus FE. Jamie ran her fingers over the letters. Who's JL? I don't know, I said. But that's definitely Frank. We circled the wall and found a second set of initials, then a third. Each one matched a name we'd seen in Frank's notebooks. Neighbors, friends, people who had come and gone over the years. It wasn't just a wall. It was a record, a timeline. Jamie sat on a low stone and looked around. Do you think this was where they met? Or maybe where they gathered? There was a stillness in the clearing that felt different, peaceful but heavy, like the air remembered every conversation it had ever held. Oakley sat down in the center of the ring and closed his eyes. We didn't speak much on the walk back. There was a sense that this wasn't over, that the hill and the stone wall were just another piece in a much larger story. Later that night, I returned to the Ash Lane house alone. I wanted to see if there was anything in Frank's journals that mentioned a stone wall or initials. I spent hours flipping through pages, scanning notes. Finally, in one of the older entries, I found it. Spring, 1952. Took Jack, Lorraine, and Ruth to the circle. The wall still stands. We added our marks beside Mary's. Oakley sniffed every stone, like he knew each name. There it was again. Oakley. Always appearing at the right place, the right time. But this couldn't have been our Oakley. This had to be… what? A coincidence? A name passed down again? Or was it something stranger, deeper? The next few days passed with a kind of gentle intensity. People continued visiting the Ash Lane house, and we began offering guided walks to the cabin in the woods, careful to preserve the atmosphere. We didn't advertise it like a tourist site. This wasn't for selfies. It was for remembering. We added the clearing to the tour, just a small footnote at the end. Frank's Wall, we called it. Most people walked by with reverence, whispering, touching the stones like they might learn something by osmosis. Then, a boy named Caleb, 8 years old, bright eyes, a sketchbook always tucked under one arm, asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. Do you think Oakley is a ghost? I laughed, but not unkindly. What makes you say that? He finds stuff no one else sees. My grandma says ghosts do that. But he's not scary. I think he's like a memory ghost, the good kind. I didn't know what to say. Caleb ran off before I could respond, chasing Oakley down the trail, laughing. That night, I told Jamie what Caleb said. She smiled. Maybe he's not wrong. I looked down at Oakley, asleep on the rug, paws twitching in some dream. I don't know what he is, but he's something. The following weekend, Jamie and I were invited to speak at a community center in a neighboring town. They'd heard about our story, our museum, our dog. We gave a simple presentation: photos, letters, Frank's tape, the notebooks. People were captivated. But during the Q&A, someone asked something we hadn't considered. "Do you think there are more like him? Dogs like Oakley?" Jamie glanced at me, then back at the crowd. "We don't know. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to know." Afterward, an older man approached us. He said his name was Ray and that he'd fought in Korea. He wore a cap with his unit patch and a quiet, thoughtful expression. "I had a dog once," he said. "Found me in the jungle. Stayed with me until we made it out. Saved my life more than once. Then disappeared right before we were airlifted. Never found him again. But I remember his eyes. Same as your Oakley's." He patted Oakley's head gently. "They remember. Even when we forget." The drive home was quiet. I kept thinking about Ray, about the wall in the clearing, about the idea that maybe Oakley wasn't just a dog. Or maybe he was. And that was the most extraordinary thing of all. Back home, Oakley didn't settle in like he usually did. He paced. Not frantic, just purposeful. Back and forth between the back door and the fireplace. Finally, he barked once. I opened the door. He walked out, then looked back. Jamie and I followed him into the night. This time, he didn't lead us toward the woods or the cabin or the hill. He led us toward the town square. It was nearly empty at that hour. Lights dimmed, shops closed. Oakley stopped in front of the old courthouse. "What is it, boy?" He walked up the steps and scratched lightly at the door. I tried it. Unlocked. Inside, the place smelled like old books and older decisions. Oakley led us down a hallway I'd never paid much attention to, past offices and portraits, into a small room marked Records. I turned on the light. Files lined the shelves, boxes stacked to the ceiling. Jamie pulled one down and flipped through it. "Birth records," she said, "from the 1900s. Oakley pawed at a lower drawer. Inside was a folder marked Ellison, Private. We looked at each other. Jamie opened it slowly. Inside were transcripts, letters, even a sealed envelope labeled Confidential Re F. Ellison, dated 1946. She opened it. It was a government letter, acknowledging the return of a presumed dead soldier, advising discretion, granting an unofficial new identity. It was signed by someone from the Department of Defense. "He was protected," Jamie said softly. "They knew he was back," I added. "But they let him disappear." Oakley sat down. There were more files, a map with markings across the state, names, dates, coordinates. "They weren't the only ones," Jamie whispered. "We took photos, carefully replaced everything, and left the courthouse without saying a word to anyone. That night back at home, Oakley finally rested, but Jamie and I stayed up, staring at the photos, the documents. "What if there's a whole network?" she asked. "Of dogs," I half joked. "Of memory." The idea didn't feel as far-fetched anymore. What if Oakley was part of something older? Something built on protection, on remembrance, not mystical, not magical, just purposeful, intentional, a living archive. In the morning, Oakley was waiting by the truck again, and we knew it was time to follow once more. The morning Oakley stood by the truck, tail wagging slowly, felt like the start of something much bigger. We climbed in without discussion, following his unspoken direction. Oakley sat upright between us, watching the road intently, ears perked as though tuned to a frequency we couldn't hear. Jamie held her breath a little, eyes steady on the horizon, and I kept my grip loose on the wheel, ready for wherever our dog's instincts would guide us next. The journey this time took us farther than before, away from familiar roads and into places where fields stretched wide beneath endless skies. Oakley watched every passing mile, not restless, but focused, confident. Jamie occasionally reached out to stroke his back, grounding herself, as if sensing the shift in the air. We traveled for nearly 2 hours until Oakley nudged my arm gently. I glanced down. He was looking directly ahead, toward a narrow road leading off the highway. Trusting his signal, I slowed down and took the turn. We passed signs for towns I'd barely heard of, each smaller and quieter than the last. Eventually, Oakley barked once, softly, signaling me to stop. We found ourselves in a quaint village, barely a cluster of buildings around a general store, a post office, and a tiny church with a modest steeple. Oakley hopped out, waited for us, and then walked calmly toward the church's entrance. Jamie reached for my hand as we stepped inside. It was empty, the air cool and carrying a faint scent of polished wood and aged hymnals. Oakley went straight to the front pew and sat, eyes fixed on a stained glass window above the altar. It depicted a shepherd surrounded by sheep, his hand gently resting on the head of a golden-furred dog at his side. Jamie drew a quiet breath. A door creaked open at the side, and an elderly man stepped out. He wore a simple sweater, glasses perched low on his nose, and moved with gentle, careful steps. His smile was welcoming, as though he'd been expecting us. "I see Oakley found you," he said softly, eyes twinkling with recognition. "You know him?" Jamie asked, surprise coloring her voice. "Oh yes. Not this one exactly, but others before him. Oakley is a guardian, always has been." "A guardian?" I echoed, confused yet intrigued. The old man nodded, inviting us to sit. "My name is Pastor Evans. I've been waiting for Oakley, or someone he'd chosen, to arrive. You see, your dog isn't just a pet. He belongs to something very old, very important." Jamie leaned forward, heart visibly beating faster. "What exactly is he?" Pastor Evans smiled again, patient and warm. "Oakley is part of a lineage, dogs chosen for their intuition, their loyalty, and their ability to lead people back to memories that must never fade. This tradition goes back many generations, linked to families who've suffered loss, secrets hidden by wars, or simply truths needing protection." "Like Frank Ellison," Jamie whispered, connecting dots aloud. "Exactly," Pastor Evans confirmed. "Frank was special. His experience in the war led him to understand the importance of keeping certain memories alive, not for history books or accolades, but because humanity needs reminders of its compassion, bravery, and resilience." "Then the others Oakley guided us to, they were all part of this?" I asked, still trying to grasp the enormity of what we were discovering. "Each one," Pastor Evans agreed. "Every story, every hidden object was carefully left behind for Oakley to find. He's been bringing them together for decades, guiding the right people at the right moments, and now it seems he's chosen you two." Jamie reached out, stroking Oakley's fur gently. "But why us?" "Because you listened," Pastor Evans said softly. "Because you were willing to follow without skepticism. You saw beyond a dog chewing at a tree, and instead you saw purpose. Oakley sensed that openness." He paused, glancing at the stained glass above. "There's another chapter, one that Oakley is ready for you to find." "What do we need to do?" I asked. "Follow Oakley. Trust him. Let him guide you," Pastor Evans said gently. "Every place he takes you now will be connected. A bigger picture will unfold, and your task will become clearer. We spent another hour with Pastor Evans, listening to stories of people Oakley's predecessors had helped, lives changed by hidden truths brought gently into the light. The weight of responsibility settled over us, humbling, but also comforting. When we finally stepped back outside, Oakley was already waiting, nose pointed in a new direction. Jamie took my hand again, giving it a squeeze. "Ready?" "As ever," I replied, smiling warmly. Oakley led us away from the church down quiet country lanes until we reached a wooded area denser than the forests back home. There was no clear path, but Oakley moved through with quiet confidence, occasionally glancing back to ensure we followed. After walking nearly half an hour, the trees parted to reveal a clearing dominated by a massive, ancient oak tree, so enormous and old it made our backyard tree seem young by comparison. Oakley walked to the base, sniffed gently, then looked up at us expectantly. "What's here, boy?" Jamie asked softly. I knelt beside the tree, noticing a small indentation near the roots. With Oakley's guidance, I dug gently, revealing yet another box, carefully preserved beneath layers of leaves and soil. Jamie knelt beside me, brushing away dirt to reveal engravings on its surface. "To those who come after, who carry the memories forward," she read aloud. Inside were more letters, carefully sealed, and another cassette tape. Oakley lay down calmly, watching us closely. "We'll need Mrs. Greeley's cassette player again," Jamie said softly, carefully replacing everything in the box. We returned to town, Oakley visibly satisfied as we drove back. At Mrs. Greeley's, the familiar basement held an anticipatory silence. She greeted us warmly, helping set up the cassette player with gentle hands. The voice on this tape was older, softer, but undeniably Frank's. "This is probably my last recording. If you're hearing this, you've followed Oakley's trail far enough to understand your role. We all leave footprints, some deeper than others. Yours now join ours. Remember, every memory preserved is a thread in a tapestry larger than any single life. Keep weaving, keep sharing." The tape clicked off, leaving a profound silence. Mrs. Greeley's eyes shone with quiet emotion. "You're part of something extraordinary. It's beautiful to see." Returning home that night, Jamie and I hardly spoke. The weight of everything Frank had said settled comfortably, inspiring rather than intimidating us. Oakley curled between us on the sofa, a gentle guardian indeed. The days following became a pattern. Oakley continued guiding us to new discoveries, hidden documents, forgotten stories, old photos tucked away safely from time. Each finding connected seamlessly to the last, creating a narrative that stretched far beyond our small lives. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers visited us more frequently, drawn to the Ash Lane Museum, intrigued by Oakley's story. Each conversation, each shared discovery, deepened our sense of purpose. Then, one evening as Jamie prepared dinner, Oakley sat at my feet, his deep, thoughtful eyes locked on mine, seeming to say our journey wasn't finished yet. "I think he's got more in store for us," I told Jamie softly. She smiled warmly, nodding. "He always does." Together, we watched Oakley, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Oakley's guiding had become such a steady rhythm in our lives that waking up each day meant anticipating another small piece of the sprawling mystery. After our encounter with Pastor Evans and the discoveries at the ancient oak, our sense of purpose deepened further. We understood now that we weren't merely uncovering lost objects. We were stitching together forgotten lives, breathing life into stories nearly erased by time. One chilly Saturday morning, Oakley was already waiting by the truck, his eyes alert with quiet anticipation. Jamie handed me a thermos of coffee as we climbed inside. "Any idea where we're headed today?" she asked, a playful curiosity brightening her voice. "Not a clue," I replied, grinning softly. "That's half the fun, isn't it?" Oakley nudged my shoulder, directing me onto the highway again. We drove out past the familiar landscapes of farms and scattered houses, deeper into countryside we rarely visited. Each mile seemed to take us further from the familiar, into an area where houses grew sparser and fields broader, a landscape of undulating hills and dense forests. About an hour into the drive, Oakley sat up straighter, eyes fixed intently ahead. He barked once, clear and certain, and I slowed down instinctively. Just off the road stood an old barn, weathered and gray, partially hidden by dense brush. Oakley was eager, pawing at the window gently, urging us to stop. Parking carefully on the gravel shoulder, we followed our furry guide toward the barn. The structure looked abandoned, vines climbing the splintered walls, a faded sign indicating it had once belonged to the Ellison family farm. Jamie squeezed my hand excitedly. "It all keeps connecting," she said, voice hushed as though respecting the solemn quiet. Oakley nudged open the barn door with his nose, leading us into the cool, musty interior. Dust motes danced in beams of sunlight piercing through cracks in the walls. Oakley moved confidently toward the far corner, pawing at a loose plank on the floor. Kneeling beside him, I lifted the plank easily, revealing a small hidden space beneath. Nestled carefully within was another box, smaller than the others we'd found. This one was metal, polished and surprisingly heavy. Carefully extracting it, Jamie brushed away decades of dirt. On the lid, in faded ink, was written simply, "Oakley's Task." My heart quickened. Oakley sat beside us, watching closely. Inside the box was a single leather-bound journal, a brass compass, and a small envelope containing a tarnished silver pendant engraved with the initials OE. Jamie carefully opened the journal, turning fragile pages filled with dense handwriting. It was another of Frank's personal accounts, but this one focused entirely on Oakley. Not our dog, but a man named Oakley Ellison. We read in quiet awe. Oakley Ellison was Frank's older brother, a man of deep compassion who had refused to fight in the war, choosing instead to become a conscientious objector. He dedicated his life to helping soldiers return home, often at great personal risk. The journal detailed secret journeys Oakley made, guiding lost and injured soldiers to safety, acting as their silent guardian. Frank wrote of his brother with profound admiration and sadness, describing Oakley's bravery and the cost of his quiet defiance. Oakley had disappeared mysteriously during one of his journeys in the mid-1940s, never to be seen again. The pendant, according to Frank's notes, was the last object Oakley had left behind. Jamie looked up from the journal, eyes wide with emotion. "Our Oakley isn't just named after someone," she whispered. "He's continuing what Oakley Ellison started. He's been guiding us to uncover Oakley Ellison's legacy," I said slowly, feeling a powerful surge of realization. Our Oakley wagged gently, as if understanding our revelation. We spent hours in that barn, carefully documenting everything we found. Frank had hidden these truths not only to protect his brother's memory, but to ensure that future generations understood the value of courage in quiet acts, bravery shown without fanfare. Back home, we shared these discoveries with the Historical Society and Pastor Evans, who listened intently, nodding in recognition. "Oakley Ellison was a legend among certain circles," he explained gently. few knew the full extent of his sacrifice. Our story began spreading more widely, drawing visitors from beyond our town. People were fascinated by Oakley Ellison's quiet heroism, his story inspiring others to look into their own family histories, uncovering stories of their own hidden heroes. In the days following the barn discovery, Oakley seemed more relaxed, as if he'd accomplished something deeply important. Yet, we sensed there was still more to uncover. He continued guiding us, gently leading to further clues, forgotten trails marked by subtle signs, old dwellings once used to shelter fleeing soldiers, each location adding another thread to the remarkable tapestry we were weaving. One afternoon, Oakley led us to a small cottage deep in the woods, untouched by time. Inside, we found letters written by Oakley Ellison himself, speaking passionately about peace, kindness, and the enduring power of quiet courage. Each letter felt profoundly relevant, echoing wisdom desperately needed in our own turbulent times. The cottage became another piece of our preservation project, attracting even more visitors, all drawn by the story of Oakley Ellison and the remarkable dog who bore his name. Town meetings grew lively, filled with discussions about history, heritage, and the importance of preserving quiet heroes like Oakley Ellison, whose actions had shaped countless lives. As winter approached, the entire community began to transform, animated by renewed purpose. People volunteered to maintain trails, restore historical markers, and host events honoring the legacies we'd uncovered. Schools organized field trips, inviting Jamie and me to share our findings, often accompanied by our faithful Oakley, who patiently allowed children to pet and embrace him, becoming an icon of empathy and remembrance. Yet even amidst the growing recognition, Jamie and I understood Oakley was guiding us toward something larger still. Each discovery was a step closer to a revelation, yet unseen. Our hearts felt it, a quiet anticipation keeping us alert, ready for Oakley's next silent signal. We found ourselves spending more time at the Ash Lane house, carefully preserving and organizing the growing collection of artifacts. It became not merely a museum, but a vibrant community hub, filled daily with visitors eager to learn and remember. Still, each evening, as Oakley rested by our fireplace, his deep brown eyes seemed to say that our journey was far from over. We remained prepared, each dawn a fresh start, waiting patiently for Oakley's quiet signal to guide us forward once more. The morning after the discovery in the barn, I woke to the familiar sound of Oakley's collar jingling as he paced softly around the bedroom. Jamie stirred beside me, and we both knew what it meant. Another place? Another piece of the story waiting. Without a word, we dressed, packed a light bag, and followed Oakley to the truck. There was no hesitation in his step, no lingering like he sometimes did on our walks. This was purpose. He led us east this time, past the familiar edge of town, and into more rural country we hadn't explored in years. We passed through fields still heavy with morning dew and old barns leaning with age. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant pine. Oakley sat straight the entire ride, watching the road with quiet intensity. After nearly 90 minutes of winding roads, Oakley let out a low bark, signaling me to slow down. A weathered trailhead appeared, barely noticeable between two gnarled trees. I pulled onto a gravel turnout, and Oakley leapt out before I'd even turned off the engine. He darted ahead, then stopped, looking back expectantly. The trail was narrow and overgrown, clearly unused for years. We ducked under low branches and stepped over fallen logs as the trees grew denser around us. It felt like we were entering a different time, the canopy dimming the sunlight until it looked like early evening. After about 30 minutes of walking, Oakley stopped in front of an old stone foundation, partially buried by underbrush. The structure had once been a house, or maybe a meeting place, its corners still square, its hearth intact. We stepped cautiously over what remained of the threshold, and Jamie brushed away leaves from a rusted metal plate in the center of the floor. It looked like a hatch. Oakley sniffed at the edge, then sat quietly beside it. I found the handle, stiff with rust, and pulled hard until it groaned open. A narrow wooden ladder led down into a shallow underground room. Dry, surprisingly intact. I descended carefully, Jamie close behind, and Oakley waited above, watching. Inside, the space was small, about the size of a garden shed. On the far wall was a wooden chest, wrapped in oilcloth. I opened it slowly, revealing more letters and journals, along with an old radio, headphones, and a faded armband marked with a simple symbol. A tree wrapped in a circle. Jamie's voice echoed in the low space. That's the same symbol carved into the stone by Frank's cabin. I nodded. Some kind of code, a mark. We flipped through the journals. These entries weren't Frank's. They belonged to someone named Ruth Lancaster, dated between 1948 and 1962. Her writings were clear, precise, documenting people she helped move through the woods, reunite with families, and escape past traumas. She mentioned Oakley Ellison several times, his quiet leadership, his roots through the trees, his uncanny ability to know when danger was near. The journal also contained hand-drawn maps, not just of paths and safe houses, but networks, connections, names. It looked like a blueprint of an underground operation that extended well beyond what we'd imagined. Jamie traced one route with her finger. This one ends near Ash Lane. We're part of it, I murmured. The same trail, the same cause, generations later. Oakley barked softly above. We climbed out, blinking into the daylight, our hearts heavier with understanding. There was a system in place, one built on trust, silence, and dogs like Oakley, guiding protectors from one link to the next. As we walked back to the truck, Jamie stopped, pointing to a tree just off the trail. Etched into its bark were initials and a date, RL 1952. Beneath it, someone had carefully carved a circle around a tree, just like the armband. This wasn't a hiding place, she said. It was a checkpoint. That night, back home, we laid out the journals and maps on the dining table. Oakley lay at our feet, tail brushing rhythmically against the floor. Jamie and I spent hours connecting names to places, tracing movements, piecing together a broader picture. The following day, we shared what we'd found with Pastor Evans and the Historical Society. They were stunned, awed. Pastor Evans stood silently for a long time, then said, "We've only ever heard whispers about this network. But now, with this, we have something real, something powerful." Plans began forming. The Ash Lane Museum would expand into a full historical center. Volunteers stepped forward, including local students, veterans, and historians. People brought their own heirlooms, their own stories. The tree symbol became a badge of honor, a quiet recognition of those who had helped others without seeking attention. Still, Oakley was not yet finished. A week later, he led us into the Appalachian foothills, into an abandoned train station where we uncovered another journal, this one belonging to a man named Elias Turner. His entries mentioned guiding displaced veterans after the war, offering them safe passage and places to heal. Each mention of Oakley described him differently. Sometimes a man, sometimes a dog, sometimes only a presence. "He comes when he's needed," Elias wrote. "He always knows." The deeper we went, the more we began to believe that Oakley's role in our lives was not simply about Frank or even Oakley Ellison. He was guiding us through a forgotten legacy of protection, healing, and remembrance, a legacy rooted in humility and courage. Oakley became a symbol for more than our small town. Articles were written, interviews conducted. We kept our focus local, careful not to let it turn into spectacle. But we shared openly, letting others take from the story what they needed. Back home, as winter deepened, Oakley's pace slowed just a bit. He still led us, but now with a gentler rhythm, like the urgency had softened into steady reassurance. We followed with the same trust we always had, knowing each step still mattered. One cold evening, Jamie and I sat beside the fireplace, Oakley curled between us, and we reviewed Ruth Lancaster's final entry. She had written, "We do this so someone else won't have to. And if they must, they'll know they're not alone." Jamie rested her head on my shoulder. "That's it, isn't it? The whole reason?" I nodded. "And Oakley's been making sure we remember." The next morning, Oakley waited by the door, ready once again. We laced up our boots, packed our bags, and stepped into the morning chill, knowing there was still more to find. Wherever he led, we would follow. That had become our life, and we wouldn't trade it for anything. The sky was still a deep indigo when Oakley padded over to my side of the bed and gently nudged my arm. It wasn't his usual wake-up for food or a morning walk. This was different. Quiet, steady, purposeful. I sat up slowly. Jamie stirred beside me and opened one eye. "He's ready again," I said softly. She rubbed her eyes and nodded. "Let me get dressed." We moved like we were preparing for a ritual we both knew by heart. Warm clothes, thermos of coffee, notebooks, camera. Oakley waited patiently at the door, tail sweeping once or twice across the floor, eyes never leaving us. When we stepped outside, the air was sharp and crisp, frost coating the grass like a dusting of powdered sugar. This time, Oakley didn't lead us to the truck. He turned east toward the woods behind our house, the same woods we'd walked 1,000 times before. But today, he took a new trail, one that didn't seem to exist until we followed him onto it. The trees opened slowly, as if parting for us, and a strange hush fell over the forest. It wasn't eerie, it was sacred, the kind of silence that makes your heart slow and your breath come easier. Oakley led us past familiar bends and landmarks, and then deeper into parts of the forest we didn't know existed. We passed a creek with stones arranged in a spiral, a row of trees marked faintly with the tree circle symbol, and finally arrived at a glade bathed in golden morning light. At the center stood a single tree, unlike any we'd ever seen. Wide and tall, its bark smoother, its branches long and graceful, reaching outward as if trying to hold the sky. Oakley stopped just a few feet from its base and sat down, tail brushing the earth. Jamie took my hand. "This feels like the end of the trail." I nodded. We stepped closer together, Oakley watching us with a look I couldn't name. Not expectation, not urgency, more like calm. There was something at the foot of the tree, partially buried, its edge poking through the soil. I knelt and brushed away the dirt until a thin wooden panel was visible. With Jamie's help, I lifted it out of the ground, a chest, larger than any we'd found before. The wood was darker, smoother, the hinges coated in age but still strong. On the top, engraved in a circle around the tree symbol, were the words, "For those who carried it forward." My heart pounded. We opened the chest slowly. Inside were 3 things: a large bound volume, a folded wool flag with a stitched emblem of the tree symbol, and a single letter in a sealed envelope addressed simply to the final bearers. Jamie opened the letter and began reading aloud, her voice soft and steady. "If you are reading this, it means the journey is nearly complete. The stories have been uncovered, the memories preserved. What began with those who refused to forget must now be passed into the open, not as a secret, but as a legacy. You have done what many could not. You have followed without question, listened when others dismissed, and honored the silent voices of those long gone. This is your final piece to carry. The rest belongs to the world." Jamie folded the letter with trembling fingers. "It's been waiting for us." I lifted the bound volume from the chest and opened the first page. It was a ledger, not of numbers, but of names. Pages and pages of names, dates, locations, brief notes about acts of courage and kindness. Every person Oakley Ellison, Frank, Ruth Lancaster, Elias Turner, and dozens of others had ever helped. Each entry ended with a small, hand-drawn tree symbol. The last few pages were blank, save for one sentence written in newer ink. "Continue the roots." We sat beneath the tree for a long time, flipping through pages, reading aloud the names and the stories, people who had fled war, families reunited, veterans who found peace after decades of silence. The book was heavy not just in weight, but in meaning. Every word felt like a baton being passed into our hands. Oakley lay at the base of the tree, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. He looked peaceful, like someone who had finished their work. "Do you think this is what he was meant to do all along?" Jamie asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "And I think he knew we'd be the ones to carry it the last stretch." We returned home with the chest and spent the rest of the day creating a new space in the Ash Lane Museum, a final exhibit called The Legacy Tree. The bound volume was placed in a glass case, open to the first page. A copy would be made available to anyone who wanted to read every story. The wool flag was hung above it. And the letter? That we placed behind the glass, too, unopened again after Jamie's reading, its edges now slightly worn by her hands. Word spread fast. Visitors came from hours away just to see it. People cried in front of the display. Some left small notes of thanks. Others offered names of their own family members who had been helped by people like those in the book. We added those names, too. The book kept growing, and it was meant to. But something changed in Oakley after that day. He still greeted visitors, still curled beside the fireplace at home, but he no longer guided us out. No more early morning nudges. No more waiting at the truck. It was like he knew the trail had been walked to its end, not in sorrow, but in peace. He spent more time lying in the sun by the museum windows, watching the town move around him. People knew him now. Children called him the memory dog. Adults left treats for him at the gate. Oakley would wag his tail gently, give a soft bark, then return to his watch. One evening, as snow began to fall gently outside, Jamie and I sat by the fireplace. Oakley stretched out at our feet. She leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "Do you think there'll be another?" after Oakley? I looked at the dog who had changed our lives forever and said, maybe. But even if there isn't, he gave us everything we need. Jamie reached down and brushed his fur. You're our forever Oakley. He looked up at her, blinked slowly, and wagged his tail once. That night, I dreamed of a forest trail lined with glowing trees, each one holding a memory in its branches. Oakley walked ahead, tail high, looking back only once before disappearing around a bend. And when I woke, I knew he was still with us. Not because he was there in the room, snoring gently in his favorite spot, but because he always would be, in the museum, in the names, in the stories carried forward, in the roots we helped grow.